All right, we're back. Look, I don't know what causes these little glitches.
I have no idea why this happens. But
anyway.
Let's just see if we just thought we would bring you back and we'll do a little wrap up together. Whoever makes it
there
in.
We go. We got people back.
Yay, these are our regulars. Hi.
What are your thoughts about this whole thing?
Okay, so my thoughts right away. How can we be talking about enormous UFOs and not talk about the Phoenix Lights? Right?
I know, it's true. Like
So Phoenix Lights, my gosh, people talked about, well, we will often see headlines that say mile wide. I don't know about that, but this is what was reported. People were saying multiple lights. People were saying above the mountains, it blacked out huge parts of the sky.
Totally true. Look, one reason I left it out because look, everyone knows about the Phoenix Lights. I'm like, every time you talk about enormous UFOs, Phoenix Lights is like one of the first things that people come to. And I thought, let's try something a little different here. Let's mix it up. But I always think
it's important to talk about because yes, there are a lot of us here who know a lot of these stories, but there are also new people. And also for me personally, whenever someone says, what's one of the best cases, I like to bring that one up because
it is a great case.
Because thousands of people saw it. It was over the course of 12 hours. It was seen in multiple cities.
Mm-hmm.
What else can be said? Also, I don't know if you guys have seen the Kurt Russell interview about it. I'm sure you have. I'm sure everybody in this chat, you're all very well versed, has seen that. But Kurt Russell apparently was one of the first people to report the UFO sighting. He was in his own plane with his son, and he reported 6 lights in a V shape as he was coming in for landing, and reported it as unidentified because they said there was nothing there. So
there were a lot of witnesses. Yeah, there's when you talk about the Phoenix Lights, I don't want to say it's two definitely different things, but it might be two different things. So the first element of it takes place over a number of hours through the state of Arizona. It actually starts in Nevada, goes through Arizona. You have a lot of witnesses who are seeing a huge wedge-shaped or triangular. Yes, it depends on the angle they're seeing it, but an object that's angular and it's really large. I don't know what the general estimate of that object is because witness estimates do vary, but it seemed to have been large.
It seemed like it was very large. Many accounts are huge. And I just want to add also, we were in Phoenix because we were visiting MUFON and our friends, Stacy and Jim, Phoenix MUFON. And they made, I believe, maybe with Dr. Lynn Kitai, but remember the
little museum.
The museum.
Yeah.
They made this incredible
there's like a local museum, a walkthrough
of the Phoenix Lights and what happened. So they charted the path and all the different reports. Yeah, so
it was very nice.
If you're ever there, it's definitely worth checking that out. It's very, very cool.
Well, so yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So, and they point this out as well in that display, but you have got the sightings during the daytime, and then you've got the night sightings, which were video recorded by a number of people. And that's, I think, when you think of the Phoenix Lights, that's what people are primarily thinking of. And they're in this kind of huge circular or mostly circular formation. And the question is, what were those things? So that you've got all these arguments. People say, oh, they were dropping flares from the nearby Luke Air Force Base.
Right. Flares, I mean, that's crazy. And so flares would travel with the wind, would they not? They would not be synchronized.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And not only, there's that, there's the fact that there's been a number of analyses, in fact, a very good one done. I think this is a good one done by Jim Delatoso, who's out that way, who has his own little large database of types of lights that are observed, aircraft lights and flare lights and all these types of things. And so measuring against that database of large numbers of images, he did a very detailed photogrammetric analysis of these lights and said, look, these are not like anything that people are describing. So they're unique.
Right.
So I respect that analysis, and I'm not inclined to think that this was a conventional explanation. There's some people who go back and forth on this one, and they'll just say the first series of sightings during the daytime, like Kurt Russell's and Fife Symington, the governor of Arizona, is another one. They got a very good look at this. He's another one. He was a pilot.
Right.
And in fact, was very much involved in debunking the whole thing publicly. In the aftermath of this, people got very, very worked up. There's the city council of the area. Frances Barwood was her name. She was one of the members of the local city council. Basically ruined her public career by wanting to investigate this. But one of the things that Fife Symington did to kind of allay public panic was hold a press conference. And at the press conference, he brings up this guy with this alien mask and just sort of diffuses attention. And 10 years later, in 2007, at a press conference, he's brought out there and he says, look, not only did I do this as a way to disable public fear, but I'm pretty sure he said that he was told that he needed to do this. And furthermore, he himself was a witness. And he said, I'm very experienced in the air and there's nothing that we are building look like that. So, it was fair. We should have done. I should have incorporated the Phoenix Lights. Well, so now we just did it.
Yeah. So we just did it. And I just want to thank people before I go in and grab a couple questions if you're up for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. I just want to say thank you to all the regulars. I see you guys here and it's amazing to have you. Thank you for everyone, all the wonderful comments about the show. Thank you to our members. We see you in there. There's some really good chats that happen, some really good sharing that goes on in there. And we just love that. Okay, let's see.
I always love the people who come to our chat. They're some of the most fascinating people. I just love it. I really appreciate that you guys are here. So thanks for all of your commentary.
Okay, so, I'm gonna go backwards on a couple things. It's not all totally related. Jason says, would love to see Richard interview Dean Radin, PhD. Totally agree with that. Yeah. We're both very familiar with Dean Radin and his work.
For the record, I did an interview with Dean Radin, 10 years ago for one of his podcasts. If you were to search, it's probably out there. I have no idea where it is. But I have spoken with him. We got along very well. I would love to do a follow-up. It's been a long time.
Yeah, he was just author of Real Magic and Entangled Minds. I believe Radin would be able to enlighten Richard and all of us on current psi research and abilities proven it's true. I'd like to see what he's been up to lately.
I did a pretty careful reading of Entangled Minds when it came out years ago. I thought it was a very interesting book.
Yeah, I met Dean, and he had a fascinating story. It was, a lot of people know I went to the Monroe Institute, and, I'm into binaurals and hemisync and all of these things. And Dean Radin was a guest at we were doing one of the programs in California at IONS, which Dean Radin is part of. And so he was a guest speaker that came in with his own personal story of binaurals. And I'll tell that sometime. Or I did on another show. But he was just proving to people that binaurals do affect you and that you shouldn't drive. He had a very funny experience with it. So.
Oh, yeah, right. He got a little woozy after the binaurals. Was that it?
No, but I want to remember the story just right. Or maybe even let him tell it if he decides to come on, because it's such a good story.
Good. Will do.
So, yes. So noted. The comment is noted. So I love this from Drew. With the increasing level of sophistication of holographic technology, how do we now trust what we see with regards to UFO sightings? Thoughts?
Good question. Don't know. I mean, it may not be easy to do.
Yeah.
In the old days,
harder and harder, right?
That's totally true. One thing is, if you get multiple, is it possible that they'll create a fully 3D representational image, or is it something that will be visible in one way from one angle and look maybe artificial from another angle? If that's the case, and you want to get multiple perspectives. But no, I agree. It's going to be harder and harder to do if that's something that is in the works. And in fact, we know that the technologies for this are being developed.
Oops, sorry.
But the real question is, when you're talking about so many sightings, all right, my take on it is, what we're seeing is a very substantial active infrastructure that most of the time hides itself from us. This is my opinion now. So So I think that we're actually sitting and living amidst an active volley of a civilization that's going on around us. And we're just like the horses with the blinders. We can't really see beyond what we're allowed to see, and what we are allowed to see by these other beings.
Yeah.
So, but they're not perfect. So it's not like they have godlike ability. They have substantial ability, but we are able to detect them increasingly because our own society is becoming more sophisticated with
It would
us.
seem.
So I think we're getting a lot of bleed through of their secrecy is coming through, and we're noticing it. Now, what Drew is saying is, muddying the water still is our own government and military's increasing capability of creating very realistic illusions. And, well, that's an issue. I mean, I'm not going to deny it. So it's just another complication to this bloody mess. I mean, UFOs have always been a difficult thing to investigate, and this is just going to be another thing to have to deal with.
I agree. Okay, Journey's Angel, I just want to acknowledge, I never usually bring these ones up, but just for fun. I watched a video of Richard Bleepin Dolan when he had short brown hair. He looks so much more distinguished now. Tracy has really done a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. I miss the dark. And I'm kind of missing those big round glasses I used to have. That was kind of a look. Black hair, round glasses, no facial hair. That was the look for a while there.
That was great at the time.
Times change.
I think you look great now.
Well, I'm glad to hear that coming from you, and thanks for the comment. So, okay. That's that. No more talk about the appearance.
No, I won't bring that up anymore. And I never usually do. But okay. So Carla Turner came up quite a bit tonight in chat, and I was saying, any questions for that? We might want to save that for the David Jacobs night.
Yeah,
I think that would be appropriate.
Well,
for that.
She was, unfortunately, she's been gone for a long time now. Yeah, I think so. I mean, Carla Turner is definitely can be considered one of the pioneers of abduction research. She wasn't the first, but she was one of the early important ones, and she had a very unique perspective on this. And of course, one of the people who pioneered the phenomenon of military abductions. She's worth reading. She was a PhD in medieval literature, I think was her thing. And then she just got very involved in the UFO phenomenon and was a very, very intelligent and thoughtful writer. There's one really good lecture of Carla Turner's on YouTube, taken not long before she died, I think maybe a year or two before. It's very good. I think it was done in Philadelphia.
I think there was a time when on our member site in the chat, everybody was really getting in and sharing links about Carla. So that's definitely a good discussion.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll
come back to Carla Turner.
Yeah. Now these ones, Kentucky Man brought up 1994 Air France incident.
Yeah, I remember that one. In fact, I don't remember if that was one near Paris. There's one right over Paris in the 90s. I think it was a different one, actually, 97. The 94 one was a big one, too. It was a commercial, not a military one. It was a commercial case where they saw a very, very large UFO. There are a number of these cases from the 90s. I think, actually, I should do an entire program on commercial aviation encounters in the 90s. It was actually it was an active decade, and we've got a lot of good cases from that time period. So
I think that sounds great.
That was one. There's a couple from the U.S., one in Texas from around that time period, and a bunch of others. A lot of, when you look at the amount of flights that we have, UFO sightings are very, very few and far between. But that's just because we're flying all the time, every day. There's still quite a bit of quantity that's out there. And I'm going to come back and hit the 1990s aviation sightings, I think.
Okay, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Someone was just asking about any conferences that we tainted honor, about any conferences that we have upcoming. And by the way, they said Dolan is a bright light in a sea of disinformation. I'm always ready to hear him out. Would love to know if you guys would be at any upcoming conferences. Thank you.
Well, I want to respond to that, and I'm glad that there are people who feel this way, and I will just tell you, look, my only goal, it's not to give every answer, not to like answer every single question that's out there, not to be omniscient. My goal is probably what your goal is It's simply to seek the truth. And that's it. I have just as many questions as you guys have, if not more, because I've been thinking about this a long time. I've had time to develop a lot of questions, and they're not all answered. I suspect that many of them will never be answered. My attitude is it's okay for me not to know something. Like, that's actually a strength of science. That one of the big differences, skeptics love to quote Bertrand Russell. He's like the high priest of their skeptical religion. But it so happens that I'm a big fan of Bertrand Russell. I got a lot of his books in my library downstairs, and I've read them. I know Bertrand Russell. I'm a big admirer of him. He did one book from the 30s called Science and Religion, and he's just talking about different points of view between the scientific point of view and the religious point of view. And yeah, look, so Russell's kind of tough on religion. So for those of you who are spiritual and religious out there, just listen for a little while. I'm not trying to demean your belief system here, okay? But what Russell pointed out, this is, I think, a really important distinction. This is where I always come from with UFOs. He said, like, a scientific worldview, a truly scientific worldview does not pretend that it has final truth of anything. Mm-hmm. In Russell's opinion, scientific truth is always provisional. That is, it is based on the best working theory that scientists can develop at that time based on all the data that they have. Mm-hmm. And so scientific truth, that's why we talk about like the theory of this, the theory of that, the theory of evolution and so mm-hmm. forth. Because they're a theory, they're a hypothesis. Mm-hmm. They can be very powerful. And scientists can act like it's a final truth, but science as a rule treats all truth as provisional, subject to revision. Mm-hmm. When new information comes along, you revise your conclusion, and that's always been my attitude with UFOs. As opposed to the way Russell describes religious truth it is eternal. And indeed, religious truths or insights come from God, or they come from nowadays, they'll come as a download from spiritual entities, but they're treated as truths, not to be questioned, generally speaking. That's a religious mindset. And so Russell said, look, that gives you more of a psychological sense of certainty, but it's more brittle. And when it comes up against new data that contradicts it, there's a problem there. And it's not easy to revise mm-hmm. religious truths or spiritual truths. And so it's not that you don't want to have a spiritual orientation to life. Be my guest. I think that's a great thing. But the point is, in your attitude toward truth, my attitude toward truth with a UFO subject, it is a scientific approach. That is, it's just basically getting as much information as I can get, mm-hmm. putting together the best hypotheses I can get based on it, and then being prepared to change my theories when new information comes my way. And that's all I try to do. And if that means I'm a light shining in the darkness, and so be it, good. What we need, in my opinion, is exactly that type of attitude if we're going to make progress. It's like, don't pretend that you know something that you don't know, right? Mm-hmm. There's nothing more annoying than smug people. Some of them are famous who pretend that they know things that they don't really know. Mm-hmm. And all that they're doing is, like, when you pretend that you know something, you're stopping yourself from investigating, and you're often stopping other people from investigating too, because, some people are easily swayed by that. They're like, oh, well, so-and-so must know, so just give up trying.
Right.
Okay.
It's more
rant over.
Okay, USO show sometime.
Yes, for sure. Let's do that.
Great idea.
So, unidentified submersible objects, underwater UFOs, basically. Yeah, we want to talk about that. A lot of sightings, not a lot of really excellent, detailed work, but there has been some. There was back in the 60s, a fellow named Ivan Sanderson wrote a very good book called Invisible Residents, a very fine book, in part because he was such a good writer, but also a good analyst. More recently, there's a gentleman named Carl, Find, I think. I knew Carl, and he has a website. I don't know if it's still out there, water UFO or water-based UFO, and he collected a bunch of these sightings. And they're out there. There's a lot of good water-based UFO sightings. And yeah, we'll come back to that. That's actually, maybe we'll do that next week.
I love that idea.
All right, we're going to think about that. Good suggestion.
Yes, great suggestion. Okay, a couple more. Does Mr. Dolan recommend any books that categorize these different kinds of UFOs in a kind of standardized way for future reference? I don't believe that exists, but I think that's a good question.
Well, there's a couple of good classic books that are worth looking at. I mean, look, for categorization, hell, go into the old books of J. Allen Hynek. He had a book called The UFO Experience, where he, you know, talks about, I mean, it was Hynek who came up with the CE 1, 2, and 3 classifications, close encounters of the third kind. That was Hynek. He really did try in his later years to kind of provide a kind of scientific perspective on this. I would recommend the best thing you can do with UFO research is read quality books by quality writers, thinkers, investigators. So people that I would say fit that bill. I mentioned Ivan T. Sanderson. It's an old classic, but look for Sanderson. I've written about him myself. He had a book called Uninvited Guests, I think, from the 60s, and then Invisible Residents. They're both classics, and partly because he's such a beautiful writer. It's such a joy to read people like Ivan T. Sanderson. I'm a big fan of a number of the books by Timothy Good, not just Above Top Secret and Beyond Top Secret, but even his last book, Earth and Alien Enterprise, I consider to be quite excellent. But in terms of like, oh, you want a good scientific analysis of UFO, the science of UFO propulsion and how they do what they do. There is a very good scientific book by a fellow named Paul Hill called Unconventional Flying Objects. A very fine book. He published it posthumously. Paul Hill was a scientist at NASA during the 60s, and he was known as like one of the main UFO guys, and people would send UFO reports to him. And he wrote a brilliant, comprehensive theory as to how these things did what they did. And I would just highly recommend it. There's a lot of math equations in there, but there's also a lot of comprehensible analysis. And the thing about him, he doesn't answer every single question about what they do, but he takes like from 50 unknown things, he reduces it down to like 2 or 3. So he really makes it much more comprehensible. I don't know if that's really answering the question, but it just came to my mind.
Okay, we're just doing rapid fire questions here. So here's a few more. Are there any, because I think you might like this, are there any free online reads that are good? And help explain what these crafts are. Oh, I don't know about crafts, but you are definitely, free online?
I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan. I haven't gone lately, but I've gone many times. UFOevidence.org. Yeah. UFOevidence.org. Great site.
Okay.
Great site. I don't know who these people are who organize that site. I wrote to them. They're like, I don't know, maybe it's an intelligence agency. I don't know who they are, but they put together a truly sober, comprehensive website dealing with UFO data. I highly recommend it.
Okay. Now, this was from earlier. Richard, can you please, this is from Jack Harper. Richard, can you please talk about the absurd paperclip UFO Nazis narrative when you consider that the current world order is you must have spelled it wrong.
Multiracialist.
Oh, no, you didn't. Multiracialist and globalist.
Why would so-called Nazis do this?
Yeah, sorry. I saw that earlier. And
I'm not sure I'm really understanding all the nuance of this question. But I'll just talk a little bit about the whole Nazi UFO narrative. I mean, I've looked into this a lot. I mean, I was always of an instinct that the Nazis did not create functional flying saucers. You know, early on in my research into this, I just thought that seems a little too far-fetched for me. But admittedly, like, I had not gone into the great detail. So I was provisional in my attitude. And then came along the books of Joseph P. Farrell, where he really investigated this, and Roswell and the Reich, and the Black Sun book, and a lot of the other books that Joseph wrote. They're really very interesting research, good research. And he seemed to be building a case that the Germans were really quite advanced in unconventional physics. We learned this from The Hunt for Zero Point by Nick Cook. And really were developing their own versions of flying saucers. And so that opened it back up for me. I'm at the point now where I think, I'm pretty sure in saying that the Germans were developing, people like Victor Schauberger, and not just the Horton brothers, but others as well, who were developing unconventional airframes and unconventional types of craft. The real question is, how far do they go? You've got talking about the
this
claims.
Is Jack. I just asked him if he wanted to expand.
Oh, talking about the claims of Farrell and guys like Wilcock and Good about that the world is secretly controlled by Nazis. Oh,
thanks, Jack.
Okay. There's a lot there to unpack. Is the world secretly controlled by Nazis? The world has a power elite. I don't think we can have any dispute about this. That's why there are meetings called the Bilderberg meeting, and that's why all these other, the round table, the so-called round table, which includes the Bilderberg group and the Council on Foreign Relations and the trilaterals, and it's the clique. It's the family that they're in it and we're not in it. All right. And they do run the world, and they've got a beyond preponderant amount of wealth and power by which they control the primary levers. Are they actual Nazis? I think no, they're not all formally Nazis. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. We're kind of mixing up historical context here. So the Nazi movement, specifically of the 1930s and 40s, of course, was a particular historical phenomenon. And Jim Marrs and other people documented how many of those Nazis survived the Second World War and were brought through what were called the rat lines of Europe and into South America and into the United States and into Russia too, the Soviet Union and elsewhere, where they continued and where they did appear to have established a network of sorts. And it could be a significant network. I don't think that we really, to this day, have the true, full, deep story of what happened to all of those guys. Did they go to Antarctica? I think the answer is no. That's my opinion. They went to South America and became quite prominent in Juan Perón's Argentina, in Bolivia, in Paraguay. Hell yes. In the United States. Yes. In Soviet Union. I don't know to what extent, but I know the Soviets brought in some of their German scientists, and I'm sure many of them were unrepentant Nazis. But look, when you've got advanced science, a lot can be forgiven by powerful entities that want your knowledge. So the real question is, what is the full nature of the conspiracy at the top? I'm not willing to go along with the thesis that they're all Nazis. No, I mean, that's a bit simplistic. That's the same as saying they're all Zionists, or the same as they're saying they're all one thing or all another. I've never agreed with that. All right. They are all super wealthy. They are all super powerful, and they do have preponderant influence over global banking and finance. That I certainly agree with. Beyond that, I think everyone is kind of spitballing here. I don't really know if they know. So I guess I'll just say that.
Okay, I'm going to change to something else. Julian, you said please check out Paul Stonehill. Paul Stonehill is one of Richard's authors, and you are right. We are actually trying to hook up an interview with him. We are
yeah.
I mean, we've talked to him already, so that is something to look forward to that is coming. And you're right, he has lots of great information. So
yeah, big fan of a lot of Paul's research. There's not many Russian-speaking researchers who are, more or less active in the English-speaking world, and Paul is one of them. And he lived in the old Soviet Union. He's here now in the U.S. and has good insights into a lot of Russian and Soviet-era ufology. And he has a very good book. We mentioned USOs earlier. I published a book of his, Russia's USOs. He co-authored with Philip Mantle. It's a very good book.
Mm-hmm. Because we are trying to do more of a global approach to what's going on. And that is actually one of the questions that someone asked earlier that I was just trying to find back in my list. They were saying I don't have it here, but basically, how come it seems like everything happens in the U.S., but I think it doesn't really.
Oh, in terms of what, sightings?
In terms of sightings.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, it's a global phenomenon.
Right.
The thing, though, is that the U.S. has the best reporting infrastructure in the world for UFOs. Like, that's just a fact. So if you are a UFO witness in the US, you're going to have a way better chance of getting your sighting recorded in one way or another than in any other country. Maybe Canada's the only other exception. Canada's got a similar kind of infrastructure. They've got MUFON there. They've got the National UFO Reporting Center. But like, other countries don't have that to the extent. And so they get overlooked all too frequently. But the phenomenon's there. It's every bit as much. In fact, one case I was looking at earlier today, I didn't talk to you about this, but I want to come back to this. Was a case from Madagascar. That's the island off of the southeast part of Africa, from 1954, researched by the French researcher Gildas Bordes. And it's a really good case, and I want to come back to that. There's a lot of these cases from around the world going back through the decades. There's just not as many because, well, the U.S. From the 1940s onward had the most advanced infrastructure with which to report these things. Other nations, have easily caught up in terms of general infrastructure, but not in terms of UFO reporting. So that's the basic thing. That's the problem.
Okay, and that was from Halil. So thank you for the question. And Jay King saying there's still more stigma in Europe. So I don't know if you feel there's more there than here, but
I think that's true.
Yeah,
I think that's true. It's funny because I've talked to some Europeans who've said, no, we're much more open about it. And I think, I don't know, every time I've gone to Europe, the culture just seems very, very suffocating relating to UFOs. That's just been my opinion for, 15 years that I've been going over there. Not entirely, but generally. That includes England as well, Britain, as well as the continent's worse. But Britain's pretty bad as well.
Mm-hmm. But something we have been trying to do is to slowly bring in more researchers from around the world so we can all hear the state of things.
The phenomenon
globally.
Yeah, it's not restricted to places where people are less skeptical. Like, it's everywhere. And it's all throughout Europe. It's throughout Asia, as far as we can tell.
Mm-hmm.
But there, the reporting mechanisms are even worse.
Right.
Like, even worse than in Europe. So, right. And Africa as well. Like, there's just, and the Middle East, like, it's very spotty, very spotty. I have one of my biggest hopes for ufology is that it develops a global communication system whereby wherever you are in the world, you can report your UFO to a centralized database and we can all share. Like, that would be important. But there's just like too much. Right now, there's just too much where we're disconnected. China, I've interviewed, 2 people from China just in the last few months.
Chuck Fan Xiaoma. Yeah.
And it's really tough. Even that one country, that massive country, is still, in a lot of ways, blocked off.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of work to do.
It's too bad.
Yeah.
Fashion Star, I know you asked a question earlier, which is one of my favorite questions personally, but I don't know where it is. You were asking.
Do you remember?
Yes, it was. I think basically you were asking if do we think there's any sort of intersection of aliens being here and AI? Is that right? You asked something like that.
Absolutely.
Yes, I absolutely think.
Yeah, look, this is something I've been thinking about. I believe, I think this is true, that among any of the UFO writers, I'm certainly one of the first who really got into this in a big way.
Takeover.
Back in 01 or 02. In fact, in my very first book, UFOs of the National Security State, I did some general speculation at the end about the fact that they're probably a product in one way or another of artificial intelligence. And then I expanded that thought in a couple of articles in 01 and 02. That's on my website, Richard Dolan Press. Go through some old articles. You'll find it there. But I do believe, when we understand that we are so close, moving full speed ahead to some version of a singularity of artificial intelligence, where it becomes conscious in some way, then clearly we would have to assume we're not the only civilization that would have reached that threshold.
Right.
And so if that's the case with other civilizations, they would have reached a singularity threshold and would presumably be the product in some way of of that advanced AI. The one thought that I've just recently been revisiting myself, and I haven't read this anywhere, so this is just my own thought here as a non-expert, is would all singularities necessarily look the same?
Yeah, you've been talking about that a lot.
Like, would our singularity look the same as an alien singularity? It's just worth asking, because we have a certain kind of computer science that's developed here in our civilization. Is it necessarily the case that all computer sciences would develop in the same way?
Right.
I don't
Unlikely.
know. It would be really interesting for you computer scientists out there. Like, think about this. I would love to know what you think. Can you envision like a real out of the box version of computer science? I want to come back to this.
It's really a huge discussion. We talk about this a lot lately, and we should really do a whole show on it. We should do a whole show on Jacobs. We should do a whole show on this. Yeah, well, let's do a list. We have to do a list of this and just check them off. But anyway, so my point is simply, if these ETs or any ET were to have achieved their version of a singularity, where they develop a conscious, sentient sort of series of algorithms that, their computers are conscious, would they be conscious? Would they be hyper advanced the way ours? Like, what we're envisioning in our society is that our algorithms become self-aware and go through a process of rapidly upgrading themselves faster and faster and faster. Exponentially, so that, the moment that they achieve human level intelligence, like 5 minutes later, they'll achieve godlike intelligence, and they'll just keep going. That's the theory, whether it happens or not. So it's predicated on the fact that our computer science is just going to go exponentially improving itself. And when you really think about it, nothing is exponential forever. Like, it's just, that's not a sustainable thing. Like populations, technology, food, I don't think anything can be exponential indefinitely. AI singularity is unfathomable. I don't even know how we could begin to sort of speculate where that could go. So I'm looking at a question there. No, I agree. It's a good point. Like, we don't really know. Someone writes, why would we expect AI to be peaceful when we as a human race generally cannot be? Yeah, totally. I agree with that. Yeah. Not only AI, but any extraterrestrials. Like, I've never been persuaded, or I've always been left cold by this argument. Oh, well, any advanced extraterrestrial race that comes here must be peaceful because they would have destroyed themselves. I'm like, that's the most ridiculous logic I've ever heard. Or they must be peaceful because they would have destroyed us by now. Again, ridiculous logic. Like, there's no logic there. Right? I'm getting a little worked up. So, okay. I'm just saying. Here we go. Yeah. and why are we, let's stop beating ourselves up because we're violent. Like, let's seriously stop that. All right. We are mammals. We are animals. What do all animals on Earth do? They kill other animals. Why? Because they have to survive. That's what they do. They're either predator animals or they're prey animals. And if they're prey animals, they eat other life, plants. They're violent against plants. You could look at it that way. Like, all life consumes life. We're predator species. We've got the eyes in the front of our head. That means we're predators. And that's how we evolved to survive. All right. So think about life on any other world. All right. Life, unless you or anyone else is going to show me an argument otherwise, I'm going to go on the assumption that life on other worlds eats other life on other worlds to survive. That within an ecosystem, life adapts to survive. Now, unless someone comes up with a really good argument otherwise, that's my assumption. And if life is going to adapt to survive, then there's a competition for resources. And if there's a competition for resources, there's going to be aggression of some sort or another. And that means that any species that goes from there to here, they're going to have some aggression. Like, that's going to be part of what they are. It doesn't mean that they're going to be violent.
but it does mean that they
You're
might be
saying
predators.
that will happen because of competition for resources?
I'm just saying that's because that's how life evolves, and they are presumably life forms.
But what if they're just visiting?
Oh no, they might not be here to enslave us or destroy us.
I mean, I don't think that's the case for all of them. I definitely think there's some stuff going on.
I'm just saying, I'm making a different point. I'm just saying, there are people who have this assumption that all these other extraterrestrials are totally peaceful and they don't have violent tendencies.
We
and
get
I'm
what you're saying.
If they are life forms in any way, then that's probably not true. It's probably not true. Like they probably have aggressive tendencies because that's just what life is. Right? So, that's all I'm saying.
All right.
That's it. Maybe not that much of a point, but it was interesting to me.
Do you know what time it is?
It's late. We gotta wrap this up.
You guys have been with us for so long tonight. Thank you. You have been so great. It's like part 2. We did all questions and answers, which was really fun. We were kind of doing them on the fly, and I was grabbing some ones. By the way, I just want to say a huge thank you again to Lori and Michael of Pursuing X. We could not do this without them. They're amazing. They help monitor this, and they give us your questions because I can't possibly keep track of everything because there's so many of you and there's so many great things being said in there. So we just want to give them a huge shout out and a huge thank you.
Totally agree completely. They're good friends and they do everything. Yep. I'm just noticing a couple of other comments here.
Sure.
Someone says, debate Dolan and Greer. I don't know about debate. I would have a discussion with Stephen Greer anytime. I would enjoy that. I think that would be a very interesting thing to do. And someone else mentioned Ron Pandolfi a number of times.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up, actually.
Yeah, the real Pandolfi expert in the UFO crowd is Grant Cameron by far. Grant knows Ron Pandolfi, talks about Ron Pandolfi a lot. I've never spoken with Pandolfi. I'll just go out and say it. I mean, I know who he is. I know a bit about him. I have certain thoughts about him, but they're all based on not knowing him. And he's a very mysterious sort of a guy. He's with the CIA, and he's got his own very kind of interesting coterie and following around him. And I don't know what I think about him. So I don't oppose and I don't support. So my attitude is very neutral. And I would probably do well to learn a little bit more. Maybe I'll chat with Grant. Maybe I'll chat with Pandolfi himself if he's available. Who knows? So anyway, there you go.
Okay. And we have a lot of remote viewing questions adding up over the weeks. So you might want to talk about that sometime
I think we
soon.
should do a live stream where I'm just interviewing you on remote viewing and on your
these guys have wonderful questions too. And I happen to know some other people who are with us in the chat have done it as well.
We can do a remote viewing back and forth.
Yeah, we definitely could.
Before I met Tracy, I mean, I was interested in remote viewing for a long time. I didn't do it, but I've certainly looked into it in some detail. And I met, a lot of the top remote viewers and talked with them. I'm very interested in that whole phenomenon.
Yeah, I think it's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. Gosh, every time I'm on YouTube, I see, some new branch of remote viewing. So I think a lot of people are who are interested in it now and want to try it or want to do it or want to know more about it. They just sort of want to know what's what. I think it's really confusing for people. And I can give you my opinion on that based on what I've done. I'm happy to do that. And make some recommendations. And I definitely will just say this. It's something you've got to do for yourself.
David Icke's Archon's theory.
What's
Courtney Brown, all these people.
Oh,
so we'll talk about Ike sometime. Courtney Brown, maybe not.
Well, we can address it. I know that people have asked it in the chat before, what do we think of Courtney Brown? And can't give a big answer about that.
We met him.
We can talk.
We met him a year ago.
We can talk about it a little bit.
I'll say this dude totally looks like the mad scientist of all time. He's like, if you cast the craziest looking mad scientist, it would look like Courtney Brown.
I think that
that's definitely the case. No question about this. Aside from anything else.
Maybe in some of the latest little
oh my God,
icons that I've seen popping up.
If you're listening, Courtney Brown, mad scientist look, what's up with that?
He's passionate. I don't always think mad scientist thing is a bad thing. He's very, very passionate. I'm not going to say one way or the other about the Farsight Institute, but we'll say he's passionate. So
I'm critical of anyone who promotes remote viewing in a way that's non-verifiable. But that's the fact, and he does that. I'm just sorry, that's the case.
He's working on a different type of remote viewing. It's considered a hybrid version of remote viewing. I believe he calls it scientific remote viewing. And
but it's the exact opposite. I'm sorry, but I'm just going to say it's not scientific remote viewing. How can it be?
Yeah, he is trying to come up with something himself that is essentially predictive.
Well, when he makes predictions that are true, then great.
There is a version of remote viewing called associative remote viewing, where it is sort of a predictive model, which is kind of interesting. We can talk about that again in the future. Because I know it's like we've almost done 2 hours with you guys.
Yeah. I know. There's a lot of really good. So Drew asked if we can create a topic for members on remote viewing, and that's our site. That's a totally separate thing. Maybe we can do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got to wrap it up.
Yes.
We have to say goodbye.
I know.
Look at this.
I know.
It's almost 2 full hours.
Thank you to you guys. And I never do this, but I'm going to tonight. Hello to all my fellow Canadians. Hi. Good to see you guys.
I have a series of Canadian sweaters that I wear in honor of the Great White North just above.
Yes. My mother has dressed him in just about everything red from head to toe.
I don't have any here, but
I'm amazed he doesn't have any here. But
my son nicknamed me Captain Canada a year ago.
So I know people are always checking in from all over the place, and we love to know where you're all tuning in from. And but we just want to say thank you so much for being here. We love you guys. Your support means so much.
Very much enjoyed it, and I hope this was an interesting night for all of you, and we'll catch you next time.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Later. Bye.